You're watching the fascinating world of edutainment and life-improving video channel.
Kids! I can't find the remote and I refuse to stand up!
Stay tuned for your Saturday morning dose of guidance from the guidance guy.
Kids!
People, I gotta make an apology to you all right now. I waited way too long to get into Gravity Falls. Even before I had people asking me to cover the show, I've been wanting to get into it. The characters, the lore, the respect for continuity. The real mystery of Gravity Falls was not about the journals or the odd happenings of the town, but rather how the show only got 2 seasons. Oh well, the perils of show business. But even with all the intrigue that Gravity Falls gives us, there's so much more to this little town in Oregon than we even thought. I wasn't kidding. Gravity Falls is more than just an animated sci-fi horror comedy hybrid about conspiracies, ghosts, and other weirdness. At its core, Gravity Falls is about relationships. And no, we're not just talking about Mabel and her many escapades. But seriously though, Team Armando for life. Whether it's between our mystery twins, Pacifica and her parents, or Stan and his brother, the bonds between characters are at the heart and soul of this cult classic. But beyond simply going into these connections themselves, we're going to look into how these citizens relate to each other with some good old psychology. What can Gravity Falls show us about relationships? I'm the guidance guy, and your internet school counselor is about to open a portal to another level of human interaction. Let's go, shall we? Our journey begins with a psychologist named John Bowlby who developed what's now called the theory of attachment, which describes how people perceive, attain, and maintain relationships. He developed this theory in the 1930s while he was trying to discover what caused some of the children that he worked with to get in trouble with authority. He developed this theory by observing how babies interacted with their parents. And to give the TLDR version of his work, when infants had a strong bond with their parents or caregivers, when they were properly fed, changed, and so on, they tended to be able to form positive bonds with other people as they got older, while those who didn't tended to have a harder time with that. But for our purposes, we'll be focusing on a later development on his theory made by one of Bowlby's associates, Mary Ainsworth. She expanded on Bowlby's work by describing specific forms of attachment. These forms are secure, anxious, avoidant, and dismissive avoidant. And this is where our colorful characters come in. Some of our favorite denizens of this sleepy town fall perfectly into these quadrants, and we're going to be starting with the anxious attachment. So what does anxious attachment look like? Let me read off the signs. Of course, you're going to see anxiety, but that can also escalate into paranoia over the state of a relationship. And this fear can make someone jealous, possessive, manipulative, and desperate for attention and validation. And who exactly does that sound like in this crazy little town? Well, you might actually be thinking of 2 people, Mabel and good old Gideon. People with anxious attachment can be described as clingy when they're in the pursuit of or when they're in relationships. And there's tons of evidence to show that Mabel fits this description in this regard, and she has even showed signs of being possessive and controlling like she was when she was housing, not One Direction. But where Mabel shows this kind of attachment exclusively with guys that she's crushing on, with Gideon it's with everybody. With Mabel, the people of Gravity Falls, this neurotic need to be seen is in everything that he does. When he fell for Mabel, he fell hard. He quickly escalated from several love levels to "you belong to me" territory. Anxious attachment can show by either craving the approval of the object of their affection or by lashing out when they feel the relationship is being threatened. And Gideon does both. In his first appearance, we see him going all out to impress Mabel. Fancy dinners, expensive outings, he spared no expense in wooing everyone's favorite sweater collector. But when Mabel, or anyone else for that matter, tried to tell him that she just wasn't into him like that, he flipped. He was taking out his journal, calling on all kinds of magic to keep Mabel in his grasp. This type of attachment in people is born from a deep-seated insecurity about themselves and those around them. They may feel like they need to earn the love of others around them or that a relationship will complete them in some way. And in the little man's case, he's trying to soothe over his feelings of loneliness. You'll notice that Gideon isn't seen alone very often. He's either surrounded by the fans of the town, his dad, and later on, his inmate crew. Gideon's constant need for approval stems from his need to not be left alone. And in attachment theory, a great deal of one's attachment style originates from how they were connected to their parents. For someone with anxious attachment, their childhood was marked by the parents either misreading their child's needs or fulfilling those needs in a way that's self-serving to the parent. And though we don't know how Gideon was raised as a baby, we do get glimpses into his family life. Though he has a relationship with his father, it's very transactional. It's more of a business partnership than a father-son connection. Gideon's little grift makes money for the family on top of Bud's used car shop. Bud uses his son to fulfill his own financial goals as opposed to being a solid source of unconditional love and selfless support. And as for Gideon and his mom, she might as well not exist. There's only one time where Gideon speaks to his mother on screen. And what does he say? Mother. Yeah, that's it. Now that relationship could be the result of anything from neglect to Gideon icing out his mom for unknown reasons along the way. Either way, Gideon has been accustomed to either receiving attention for someone else's gain or not getting attention at all. This puts pretty much everything about Gideon into perspective. It doesn't excuse his behavior, of course, but it helps us gain understanding into his psyche. And if you want more insight into what these self-centered types could do, then check out my Let's Guys guy on Loki. I put the description below and in that special corner up top. Next up, let's look at the avoidant type of attachment. Now, of the 4 styles, this one is actually the least researched as it's also the most rare. This type of attachment is defined by a simultaneous desire and fear of relationships. They want to be with someone, but they don't, all at the same time. That's naturally going to lead to conflicting and confusing ideas about how a relationship will pan out and one's own desire for a relationship in the first place. And although there's no one in the show that fits into this attachment style for all relationships, this is what we see in Dipper in his feelings for Wendy. Especially in season 1, Dipper is all over the place. One moment he wants to be with the chill store clerk, up until the moment he actually has to do something to show his interest. He has that box of Wendy pics that we never really found out how he got in the first place, but he's also fully aware of the fact that a relationship between himself and a high schooler is just a fantasy. Thankfully, he's able to come to an understanding of his own feelings and still have a healthy friendship with Wendy, so he doesn't stay in that category for long. Not to mention some of the other aspects of the avoidant type of attachment we don't really see with Dipper, so I put a few links in the description if you want to know more about this specific type and what it would look like with real life people. And for anyone wondering, it is possible for someone to transition from one style to another based on life experiences. If you feel you find yourself in one of these less than ideal types of attachment, you're not destined to be stuck in it. Just like how we saw people and relationships change over the course of Gravity Falls, we can also change ourselves. In regards to how we relate to others, in order to address that, I would recommend getting professional help for this issue, but always know that change is possible. Speaking of change, we're going to transition to our next style of attachment, the dismissive avoidant style. In this style, think of it as the opposite of the anxious style. Instead of desperately seeking attention and validation, those with the dismissive avoidant type go out of their way to steer clear of meaningful relationships altogether. They pride themselves on being independent, not needing anybody or anything, but can also be emotionally stunted and unwilling to acknowledge the feelings of themselves or others. Now, based on that alone, for those of us who know Gravity Falls, we know who that describes. None other than Grunkle Stan himself. Stan prides himself in his ability to rely on his own skills and abilities and has lived most of his adult life untethered to relationships and other people. In fact, at times he goes out of his way to distance himself from those who would otherwise want to establish connections with the scheming curmudgeon. And it's not hard to see where old Stanley got this attitude from. Growing up with a father who was impossible to please and a mother that seemed more interested in securing the bag than anything else, Stan's relationship with his twin brother was a great source of validation and affirmation in his life. But we all know what happened. Take a mistakenly broken infinite motion machine and a brother's lost dream, and Stan is left not just devastated, but abandoned by his family. With no one left to look after except himself, Stan stopped caring about being needed or wanted and looked out just for himself. And like we saw with Dipper, the man once known as 8-Ball Alcatraz also changed over the course of the show. Sure, it was pretty much at the last minute and he almost lost his mind in the process, but hey, better late than never. And last but not least, we've got the secure attachment style. And guessing by the name, you can tell that this is the one you want to have. In the secure attachment type, we see people who have a strong sense of their own self-worth, which in turn gives them a proper and healthy view of their relationships free from jealousy or drama. The relationships do not define them, they have a strong connection to their emotions, and they're able to bounce back from setbacks. Now, seeing how we just finished talking about Stan the man, we can put him and Ford as kids and at the end of the series as an example of a secure attachment type. And naturally, Mabel and Dipper belong in this category as well in relation to each other. Come on, it was the strength of their relationship that led to them saving the world. But we can't forget about the two characters who are most excellent examples of this type from day one. I'm talking about Sheriff Blubbs and Deputy Derlin. These two show the way, the support, the openness, the understanding that they have. It's straight up inspiring, man, to see so many good examples of relationships in just one show. Because let me tell you something. Here's the thing about a lot of media out there today. A lot of them thrive on the dysfunction in relationships. If you were to use this tool on some other shows and see how many relationships are actually secure, you'd be hard-pressed to find any in some of them. And yeah, I get it, drama is what brings the viewers, but what I want to leave you with is two things. One, relationships build on one another. Just like a house, our relationships build on top of each other and show us how to relate to others in future relationships. Like we saw with Stan or Gideon, how people are treated in the past can have a massive impact on how they treat others in the present. And understanding that people act the way they do for a reason and not because they're evil for the sake of being evil, can go a long way in gaining empathy with certain people. But that leads to my second point. Don't let the past define your future. Learn from yesterday. See where you can improve from it, but don't assume that your future and your past are going to be the same. Those who do tend to have those unhealthy attachment styles. But it's those who know who they are, connect themselves with those who love them and respect them, and are willing to face both the highs and lows of life, end up being not just the most resilient, but the most secure. And not only are they secure, but they end up living the adventure of a lifetime. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and if you have any stories or characters that you'd want me to look into. And of course, do the YouTube thing. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Until next time.